Hey guys, this is Prem, back from the Franklin High School Robotics team, and today we're going to be talking about autonomous programming for the VEX V5 system. So, the main differences from Robot C is that we no longer have to depend on time as a measurement of distance. We can use degrees in the V5 system for a more precise measurement, and in autonomous, there's a different procedure to set the velocity or speed, and the most obvious one is that the syntax is different altogether, especially for autonomous. Okay, so the introduction to autonomous. So in the V5 text, we have two different commands for spinning. So the first one is start rotate 4, and this command prepares the motor to rotate along with other motors or a single motor, and this does not move the motor. It may be confusing because it says start rotate 4, but it doesn't actually move the motor. This just prepares the motor to start moving. And the second type is the rotate 4 command, and this command rotates motors along with other motors, and this one actually does move the motor. And this command is what triggers the start rotate 4 command to actually start to spin. Although this one just prepares the motors to start spinning, so this is kind of the trigger to start this command. So with these two commands in mind, we can start programming. So let's scroll down until we find the autonomous. So right here. And this is a 4-motor drive, so we're going to have 4 motors for our base. So the left front, the left back, the right front, and then the right back. So, as you remembered, we need to start off with the start rotate 4 command. So we can do dot start rotate 4. Now we have our parentheses, so start rotate 4. Oops. And now finally, we need the actual rotating command to actually trigger all of these motors to start at the same time. So instead of start rotate 4, we're just going to do rotate 4. And like that, this is going to be the trigger for all of these motors to spin at the same time. So inside of here, we're going to have 3 parameters, so x, y, and z. Okay. So x is going to be, what direction we drive. So either forward or backwards. So that's our direction. Y, that's going to be our distance we travel. So in this case, we're going to be programming in degrees. So that's our distance. And finally, our z is going to be our units for a distance. So it's also going to be degrees. Okay, so we can now fill this in. So for direction, it's going to be forward. So we can do VEX, direction type, and then forward. And say we want to drive forward for, let's say, 100 degrees. So degrees would be 100, and then the units would be VEX, rotation units, and then degrees to specify what the 100 is. And then semicolon. Good. So now we can go ahead and copy this for all of our other motors. And there should be 2 colons. and then we always end with a semicolon. Okay, good. So we have a program that drives forward for 100 degrees. And with this, we can also drive backwards. So we can just change the forward to reverse by doing REV. And now we're going to be driving backwards for 100 degrees. Okay, that's good. But you might be wondering, well, how do we change the speed of this, right? Well, what speed is it going right now? Well, that's where the velocity comes into place. So, in the VEX V5, we set the velocity of the motors before we actually rotate them as a pre-setup. So this command looks like set velocity. So this sets the speed of the motor while it runs, and the command is placed before the rotate commands. So inside the parentheses, we have two parameters. We have the value and the percent, and the value is the speed that we want, and it's out of 100, which is the motor's maximum speed. So we could put 80%, which would be a higher speed. And then we follow by the word percent to define what type the value is. And just as a note, if you skip the step and if you just do the rotate commands like we did before, the default speed is set to 50%. So if you do want your motors to spin at 50% speed, then you can skip this step. But if you want it to spin faster or slower than 50%, you have to go and set it up manually. So let's go back and say we want to drive backwards at a speed of 80%. So we would need all of the four motors again, and we have to set all of these motors equal to 80%. So left front, left back, the right front, and the right back. Okay, so now we can do the dot set velocity. So 80%, so 80 comma percent. And we can do that for all of these. And of course, if we want to drive forward instead of backwards, we would just change reverse to forward. We would just do FWD. Okay, great. So now we can move forward and backwards based on degrees. But what about turns? So turning is going to be a little bit different. And in robotics, we have different types of turns, and we're going to be talking about that. So for turning, okay, so in robotics we have two types of turns, like I mentioned before. The first one's the pivot turn, and this is where the robot turns in place, where one side of the robot moves forward, or it doesn't have to be forward. Basically, both sides of the robot spin in opposite directions. So if we look at this diagram over here, we can see that the left side moves in reverse while the right side moves forward, and thus that creates a 90-degree turn in place. But in a swing turn, one side is actually stationary, so there's no power to this motor, while the other side has power. So this is trying to go forward, but since this is stationary, we get a wide turn. So this wheel will end up over here, and this wheel will end up over here. So this is still a 90-degree turn, but it's not in place, and that's the biggest difference. So let's code this. Okay, say we want to make a 90-degree left turn. And let's make this a pivot turn, where the robot turns in place. So we would set our velocity But in this case, I'm just going to leave it at the default, so I don't need to go back and set my velocity. I'm going to leave it at 50% for now. So we need all of our foreign motors. Okay, so if we're making a left turn, we need the left side of the robot to turn in reverse while the right side to turn forward. So that's going to allow the robot to turn in place and turn 90 degrees. So we're going to use the same start command. So we're going to do start rotate 4. And then direction this time is going to be reverse. Okay, we're going to we're going to spin for 90 degrees. And that's in degrees, so we do our units in degrees. Okay, and that's going to be true for the back motor as well. And this one, since this is the right side, this is going to be turning forward. So we change reverse to forward. And then now this one is going to be the trigger motor that triggers all of these to move at the same time. So instead of start rotate 4, it's just going to be rotate 4. And this is going to be forward to make a left-hand turn. Okay, so this is how we make a pivot turn. Say we wanted to make this a swing turn. So that would mean that the left side is actually stationary while the right side moves. So we would actually not need the left side at all. So it would just be the right side that was moving, and that would create a wider turn. And again, that wouldn't be in place. Okay, great. So here are some examples you can try on your own. So the first one, we're going to be driving forward for 750 degrees at a 30% velocity. And then we're going to turn left and do a pivot turn. We're going to turn 90 degrees and we're going to do the default velocity. And finally, we're going to drive backwards for 500 degrees at 30% velocity. So pause the video and try these on your own. Okay, let's do it. So firstly, we're going to drive forward. So we need to set the velocity. So let's have all 4 of our motors. And we can use the set velocity command for 30%. And copy. Oops. Okay, good. Now we have our velocity set. Now we need to actually turn the motors. So let's copy this and change set velocity to start rotate 4. So left front dot start rotate 4. Since we're going forward, we can set the direction type is forward. And we're driving forward for 750 degrees. So that's our units, degrees. Okay, let's copy. So since we're going forward, it's going to be true for all of our motors. And we can't forget that this last motor is going to be the trigger that triggers all of these to go at the same time. So instead of start rotate for, we're going to do rotate for. Okay, secondly, we have to turn left, and this is going to be a pivot turn. And since it's default velocity, we do not have to do a preset. Okay, we can use the same start rotate for commands, except for the last one. Because it's the trigger. Okay, so since we are turning left and this is a pivot turn, the left side has to turn in reverse. And that will make the turn in place, and it will be an in-place 90-degree turn. So the left side moves in reverse, while the right side moves forward, and that will give you a turn. Okay, now we have to drive in reverse, and this time we do have to set the velocity. So let's copy. It's already 30%. Now we can copy it and change it one more time. So this is start. And since we're driving backwards, the direction type is going to be reversed. Oops. 500 degrees. So that's our units. And we can copy. And don't forget about the last motor. That is sometimes hard to forget. So this is just rotate for. Okay, and now we have a working autonomous that fits the task. So here's example 2, and I'll give you a few seconds to try it on your own. Okay, so firstly we have to drive forward, so let's set the velocity. So we can use the set velocity command. 40%. And I can just copy. So we need right. Okay, so now we've set the velocity, and now we have to start spinning the motors. So we can use the start rotate for command. And we're driving forward, so the direction type is also going to be forward. (750°). Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna copy. Okay, and don't forget that this one has to be the trigger motor. So we're going to change it to rotate for. Good. Secondly, we have to turn left, and since this is a swing turn, we only have to worry about the right side being powered. So let's set the velocity. For 45%, 80% velocity. Good. So I'm just gonna copy. Change this to start rotate. And since we're turning, we can leave the direction type as forward. (45°). Good. So remember, this is going to be the trigger. So it's going to be rotate for. Good. So we have the right side moving, which is going to give us a left turn. So now we have to drive forward again. So I'm just going to copy this. So 30%. And 500°. And finally, we have to turn right 90°, and this is a pivot turn. So let's start with the velocity. So 80%. Okay. And now, since we are turning to the right, that means that the left side will be going forward while the right side is going to be going backwards. So let's copy this. So we have to make the right side go backwards, so reverse, REV. And we'll be turning for 90°. Okay, good. We have the last motors as rotate for in all of them, and we're done. So hopefully your code looks something like this, and we can move on to the final exercise. Before we move on, you need to know one more type of command. So say you want the robot to have pauses in between. Well, for that, you would use this command. You would do VEX task and then sleep. So that's going to be your pause. And your pause is going to be in milliseconds. So say we want to stop for 2 seconds, that would be 2000 milliseconds. So 2000 semicolon, and you're done. Okay, so now we can move on to the third example. So here it is. We're going to be first driving forward for 800 degrees at the default velocity, make a left-hand turn, and that's a pivot turn. We're going to be driving in reverse, and then pause 1 second, and then do a right turn, and that's a swing turn. So take some time and do this on your own. Okay, so since this is the default velocity, we do not have to set the initial velocity. So let's list all of the motors. And we can use the start rotate for. We're driving forward for 800 degrees. Okay, we can just copy. Okay, and this is the trigger. So it's going to be rotate for. Okay, good. So we've driven forward, now we have to turn left. So this time, let's set the velocity at 80%. Set velocity. Okay, and then we have to do all 3 of the other motors. So left, back, 80%. And now I can just go ahead and copy this and change. So right front and right back. Okay, so now we have to actually start the motors and make them spin. So left front dot start rotate for. So then since this is a pivot turn and we're turning left, that means that the left side actually has to go in reverse. So the direction type is going to be reverse. And 45 degrees. So that's rotation units, degrees. Okay, and we have to do that for all of the other motors as well. Sorry about that. Good. So let me fix that. Okay, now I can just copy and then change the names afterwards, 1 and 2. So this is now right front, and then right back. And now we have to remember that we actually have to change this to forward in order to turn left. So this is going to be FWD, so forward. And remember, this is the trigger motor. So instead of start rotate 4, it's going to be rotate 4. Okay, good. So we've made the turn. Now we have to drive in reverse, and we have to wait 1 second. So now let's go ahead and set the velocity. So we can use the set velocity command. So 55%. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and copy for all of the other motors. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then change. Left back, right front, and then right back. Okay, so now we've set the speed. Now we have to actually drive. Sorry, this should be right back. Okay, so we can again use the start rotate 4 command. Oops, start. Good. So now we're driving in reverse, so it's going to be, the direction type is reverse. And for 500 degrees, rotation units is in degrees. I'm going to copy this for all of the other motors. So left back, the right front, and then the right back, and then you have to remember, oh sorry, right back, not right front. And then we have to remember that this is the trigger motor. So instead of start rotate 4, it's going to be rotate 4. Okay, so now we have it so that it drives in reverse. That's good, but then we also have to put a 1 second pause. So we can use the VEX, task, sleep, and 1 second is just 1000 milliseconds, so we can put 1000. And just like that, we're done. So now we have to turn right. So since this is going to be a swing turn, and we want to turn right, that means that the right side is going to have no power at all while the left side moves forward, and that's going to give us a turn. So let's go ahead and set the velocity. I'm just going to copy this and then change the velocity to 25% for all of the motors. Okay, so now, so actually, since we're turning right and only the left side is going to be powered, we don't need the right side at all. So now we can go ahead and say left, front, and use the start rotate 4. Oops. And this time it's going to be forward. 90 degrees. And now this time we have to use the rotate 4 command, as this is going to be the trigger. So left, back. Okay, and just like that, we have made our swing turn. And we also remembered to put the 1 second delay back here. And we're done. So I hope your code looks something like this. And let's do the recap. So today we learned how to move forwards and backwards using the 2 types of commands, the 2 rotate commands, the start rotate 4 and the rotate 4. The start rotate 4 command, the start rotate is the preparation for the motors, while as the rotate 4 command actually triggers all of the motors to start spinning. We learned how to make turns, specifically two types. We learned the swing turn and the pivot turn. The pivot turn is when both sides move in opposite directions. Therefore, it creates an turn. It creates an in-place turn. While a swing turn is when one side is actually stationary while the other side moves. So that gives us a wide turn. We learned how to set the initial velocity or speed of the robot before we actually tell it to move, and that's something a little bit different in VEX v5 compared to Robot C. And finally, we learned how to use the task sleep command for pauses in the code and to give breaks between each movement types. So say we wanted a break between going forward and turning left, we could put a pause for 1 second and let the robot just pause for 1 second. So with that concludes this video. If you did like this video, please subscribe and like this video. If you have any questions or comments or any feedback, please feel free to leave them down below. And we'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much.